Mist lay upon the white knife like something spilled by a careless god, pooling between the piers and creeping low over the river where it widened into White Harbor. Hear the gulls riding it, their cries slant and hungry. Smell the pitch heating in braziers and the tar and salt and oak shavings. Hear the steady thock of mallets along the new-built slips, the rasp of hemp rigging over wet wood, the murmur of 100 merchant tongues. The wolf's den loomed above it all, its old stones wearing the damp like ermine, and below, the merman's court breathed awake with bells and voices and iron-shod feet. Lord Wyman Manderley sat in his wheeled chair upon the gallery, great hands folded on the armrests, rings biting into pink cushions of flesh. His hair was white as surf and his cheeks ruddy with wine and winter both. A raven hopped along the carved rail as if it, too, meant to judge the busy harbor. It had come with the dawn, bearing a narrow hand and a wolf. Behind Wyman, the maester rolled the scroll and smoothed it flat beneath a paperweight shaped like a merman's tail. From Eddard Stark, the maester had said, as if the parchment itself were snow. By his hand, by his hand. Wyman had read every line once, twice, and again, until the words cut deep furrows in him. By his hand. The hand of the king, but more, the son of Rickard Stark, who had given the Manderleys harbor and home when the Reach had cast them adrift. The North remembered. "You have bidden me to answer," he said at length. His voice was mild and soft as butter, and yet men leaned closer when he spoke. "Very well. We shall answer as wolves answer, with teeth." Wylas Manderley stood at his father's shoulder, broad where his sire was vast, bearded and brisk from the yards. His coat stank of pitch and sea, and he had a scar on his forearm from when one of the new-built galleys had kicked under him in a sudden squall. "We have 23 cogs in harbor and 6 galleys downriver," he said. 3 Ibanese hulls under charter, 2 Bravosi. The master shipwright says the spring felling has been good. If we seize the tailed whale's cargo and the Bravosi's spare sail, I can put 30 sail on the Bight within the fortnight. The white knife runs south before it runs east, Lord Wyman murmured, more to the river Mist than to his son. And south is where the need lies. His grace the king hunts boar, and vultures circle the red keep. The gold lions watch the coin chests. The spiders sigh and whisper in the gutters first and then in the halls. The city must eat. The city always eats. And a city that cannot feed mislikes its kings. Wylas frowned. "Father, we sail," Lord Wyman said. He turned the ring with the merman sigil so the green stones faced the river. "We sail not to make war upon small folk cogs. No, my son, we wear tall banners and a clean conscience. We are the levy of the north, called when the Lord of Winterfell calls, and the sea is a road as much as any forest trail. We will go down to the gullet and stand watch upon the king's waters. We will look into every hold bound for the Blackwater. If the cargo is bread, we will buy it dear and send it elsewhere. If the cargo is iron, we will seize it. If the cargo is men with lions on their cloaks, we will send them swimming. But we will not starve children." "And if the Lannisters say treason?" Wylas asked. "Then we say law," Lord Wyman replied. "Eddard Stark stands for law. The law says the hand may command the king's fleets in time of need, and a Stark's need is winter's need. The city will be spared a sword if it is denied a fish. That is mercy. This I know. Mercy makes enemies no more swiftly than steel." Wylas bowed his head, and for a heartbeat the fog separated to show, far downriver, a narrow slice of pale sun over the biting gray. "I will have the banners raised and the captains called. Take Wendell with you," Wyman said, and he smiled a little, thinking of his younger son's appetite, for food and for glory both, and tell him not to eat the ship's biscuits before White Harbor is out of sight. The raven on the rail cocked its head as if it, too, found that amusing. The bell in the merman's court began to sound the hour, low and sonorous. The harbor took it up in copper echoes. "By his hand," Lord Wyman whispered once more, and pressed the signet into the wax of his reply with the easy pressure of a man stamping a memory. In King's Landing, the dusk came dirty. A smoke-laden evening wind pressed up the Blackwater and brought the stink of wet char and slaughtered lambs and unwashed men. The Red Keep was all hard angles and watchful archers. The city below it was soft as rotten fruit. Beneath high windows, carts went by with barrel lids banging, the wine merchants cursing that the vintages had turned in the heat. Laughter leapt and died without going far. Eddard Stark stood in the solar of the Hand's Tower with the river behind him and Varys before him, a bough of silk in lavender and gray. The eunuch looked like a plump moth sidling up to a candle, eyes round, hands folded, the painted smile never reaching the eyes. A letter went out from the Tower of the Hand at cockcrow, Varys said, in his voice like velvet falling. Carried by a swift raven of the north, strong wings and strong heart. Another went out for Dragonstone, by a slower, surer bird. And a little bird of mine has already whispered in a Lysine captain's ear about a man with honest eyes, to whom full sails might be sold. The harbor listens, my lord. The harbor always listens when coin speaks. Ned's hands went to the window ledge, rough granite under his fingers, cool against the heat that had flushed his cheeks. This is not done for coin. Ah! Varys breathed the syllable like incense. No. For law, then, or for bread. I find that men will kill for law or bread as quickly as for coin. Sometimes quicker. Not today. He had slept little. The words were blunt in him. A day ago he had sat at the king's bedside and listened to Robert's ragged breath, smelled the wine, the blood, the boar. He had bent and put his name to a parchment by a man's last will, and he had written that hateful word heir where the king had said son, and the ink had sat too black upon the page. He had watched Cersei Lannister look at him with amusement and know that she had seen through him as one sees a carp under clear water. The city will eat, he said. If White Harbor's ships can do it, the city will eat. If Dragonstone's ships can do it, the city will eat. And if the Lannisters would make a war of bread, then let them bear the sin of it. And if the Lannisters would make a war of gold? Varys tilted his painted head. Gold buys the city watch, sire. Gold buys sailcloth and wildfire and pretty letters with pretty seals. Gold buys the tongues of bakers and fishwives. Gold, I have often observed, buys even gods. Ned stared at him until the smile faltered. I have no gods to sell, he said. And the men you name have names of their own. Janos Slynt has children. I have spoken to him of that. Very good, Varys murmured. The city watch must keep the peace when the streets grow peckish. Peckish streets are so unkind. He sighed. The queen was seen riding today, all in crimson, with her cubs. She looked pleased. Lords look pleased when ravens are late. She can look pleased at her own peril, Ned said. He felt the ache in his leg where the bones had not healed true after the Tower of Joy. Stairs had opinions about old wounds. I sent for Stannis because the king commanded it before his breath went. Stannis is the king's brother and the rightful heir by all the laws the realm boasts. When he shows his banners, the city will wriggle and whine and then settle. The Lannisters have their claws in the coin chest, but the chest is not a throne. Very good, Varys said again, lips curving. I, who have no faith, make a prayer. That Lord Stannis will be swift, and Lord Manderly swifter, and Lord Littlefinger slower. The master of coin hates to see cargo turn back at sea. He says it offends the royal purse. He may be offended, Ned said, and you may have your prayer. But first, you will take a message to the harbor master. No ship out of Duskendale or Rosby is to pass the mud gate without being searched for false stamps and skimmed weights. The crown has not the means to fill the bakeries today. We must see that what is bought is truly weighed. Varys's eyes glittered. You will make the harbor master your man? No. I will make him honest, Ned said, and the old words came back to him. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. He had never thought to apply them to a river full of foreign cogs and quarrelsome captains. But a pack was a pack. If he could not yet bite, he would at least make the wolves show their teeth. After Varys scuttled away, Ned turned the ring that bore the dire wolf about his finger and looked down over the city. Soot ash fell like lazy snowflakes. Gulls wheeled. Below, he could see the ragged ribbon of the Blackwater, the long barracks by the mud gate, the dotted line of masts where the fisherfolk tied their skiffs. He thought of Caitlin at Riverrun's halls, of Rob at Winterfell, a boy with a man's belt hung awkward on him. He thought of Sansa's tame smiles and Arya's wilder ones. The city was a trap, but spring makes traps for fox and man alike. If he moved quickly, this could be a cage that closed upon lions. "Tomard," he called, and Fat Tom's familiar shuffle answered him. "Send Alan to the docks. He is to keep watch on the grain merchants and the weighers. If men with lions on their cloaks come to take control of the scales, he is to break their heads." "I am Lord," Fat Tom said, with a grin broad as a banner. "And if they wear spiders?" Ned smiled despite himself. "Then stroke them gently till they sleep." Dragonstone rose out of a gray sea like a thought of sorcery that had learned the shapes of beasts. The walls were scaled as if a dragon had rested there and left its hide behind, and the wind found 1,000 new ways to speak around every gargoyle. Torches guttered in sconces. The smell of kelp and old storms clung to every corridor. Davos Seaworth came up the sea dragon stair to the stone drum's great hall with wet boots and stiff fingers. He had a fish seller's hand still, even after a night had been made of him. Small and quick, with the smell of onion never quite scrubbed away. Lord Stannis Baratheon sat at a long table with a map spread before him, his jaw clenched like a vice. Melisandre hovered close by, a river of red silk with fire caught deep in her eyes. "This comes from the hand of the king," Stannis said, not looking up as Davos knelt. "Read." Davos read. Eddard Stark wrote little and clearly. The words had a northern chill to them. There was no plea in them and no softening. There was command as if from a king who had not yet remembered he was king. Davos respected that. He had seen too many men begging with their mouths when their hands were empty. "He intends a stoppage of bread," Davos said when he had finished. "He asks for our ships at the gullet and our swords on the decks. He speaks of law and the king's last will, and of the queen's falseness. He says that if King's Landing is to be saved from a sack, Stannis must be seen upon the water." "King's Landing is a midden," Stannis said. "I will not save it to hear the small folk cheer some golden boy. I am Robert's brother and I am heir. Law is law, even in a midden." Melisandre's voice brushed the hall like the touch of a shawl. "Light does not ask if the room is clean. Light simply enters." Davos rubbed his thumb where it lacked its top joint. It felt the weather more than the rest of him. "White Harbor's ships are slow, your lordship," he said. "Broad in the belly and fond of cargo. Honest ships, but not fighters. If we must stand a blockade. My Black Betha is a quick girl, and there are a dozen like her in your fleet. The Lyseni sell sails will come if they smell coin and a lawful banner to hide behind. Many men will be glad to deny Cersei bread and call it virtue." "And if Tyrell sends the red wine fleet to restore it?" Stannis asked. "I was master of ships long enough to know how easily men remember promises they have made to Hightower gold. If Lord Mace so much as twitches, Pax to red wine will set his grapes adrift on my tide." "Lord Mace has not yet chosen between two crowns," Davos said, cautious. "Let him wait. A blockade is a thing of days and weeks. It can be a feather that turns a scale. If King's Landing cannot feed itself, then the small folk will cry. They will cry for law and for bread, and men will make answer. If your banner is first in the answer, the seven will be pleased to call it Providence." "7. Melisandre's lips curved as if she tasted something sweet and pitiable. "You will not need 7 when the one true light burns." Stannis's eye moved to her and away, a man acknowledging his belt. "Davos," he said, "gather our captains. Every drum that can float makes for the gullet. We will stop the mouths of those waters. If Lord Manderly's cows come slow, my hounds will chase the calves toward them." Davos bowed. "And Salador San?" The name soured Stannis's mouth. "I will pay that pirate's price if I must." He jabbed a finger down onto the map at the squiggle that was Dragonstone, then dragged the finger to the broad, inviting funnel of the bay and the black line where the Blackwater fell into it. "We will stand in a line from Driftmark to Massey's Hook. If a ship wishes to pass, She will show us her belly, and we will decide if it is fit to swell on King's Landing's hunger. Be sure every captain knows. This is the king's will. And if any Lannister ship thinks to play lion among wolves on the water, we will clip its mane with fire. Your lordship, Davos said, and when he stood again the wind stole in through the hall and flipped the corner of the map like a lizard's tongue. Sansa had never liked the smell of the river, but that night it seemed stronger, as if the whole city were a cask that had gone off. She sat on a stool before her mirror while her maid smoothed her hair and told her the story of a Myrish princess whose suitors had fought with poisoned birds. The maid held a pin in her mouth, and that made her voice soft and wanting. Sansa watched her own face in the glass and tried to imagine herself a Myrish princess. The candlelight made her eyes bigger. Father had looked at her earlier in the day with his far eyes, the ones that were not looking at her but at snow-lashed trees. He had kissed her on the brow and said only, "Be gentle with your sister." Arya had stuck out her tongue when Sansa told her to be gentle with her. It was always like that. When the maid had finished and gone away, Sansa crossed to the window and pressed her fingers to the stone. A hawker's cry came up from the street, and then a woman's voice, high and angry, and a baby squalling. She thought of the queen in crimson and gold, riding with her hair as bright as the wine in her goblet. The queen never sweated. The queen had never sat in a kitchen with a string of sausages hanging behind her and a scullion bumping her chair and a cat on the table, like Sansa had on the long journey south. The queen was always just so. Sansa wanted to be just so. She did not think of bread. Bread appeared the way the sun did. That was the point of cities. Arya, if asked, would have said that bread did not appear. It was snatched. That afternoon she had slipped from the room Syrio used to call a water dancer's pool and found that someone had hung red cloth over the doorframes in the lane where the dyers worked. She had watched a boy with a charcoal face juggling rocks for the amusement of a man who had no left ear. The rocks had looked like bread skulls when they fell, and the man with no ear had cursed like a song. She had stolen an apple from a cart, and it had been mealy and brown in the middle, and she had thrown it at a rat and missed. That was the point of cities. If Arya had been in Winterfell, she would have had to work harder to miss. She padded back into the pool room, barefoot, and Syrio was waiting with his wooden sword and his smile. "Again," he said, and like that, the city's noise fell away to a circle of breath and the wet slap of feet on stone. On the river, janitors of the realm put their hands on the scales and the weights, and corals bloomed where coins had used to. 2 days after the ravens flew, 2 days of heat and the smell of lamb fat and of bees maddened by dyes. Alan stood with his cudgel and his Winterfell badge and watched a wine merchant try to slip a sack of barley past the harbormaster under a false certificate. Alan broke the merchant's nose and let him bleed into his own sack, and when men in red lion cloaks came to argue, Alan's men showed their teeth and the lions went away. That afternoon, sailors out of Tyrosh swore that Dragonstone's galleys had been sighted by the point, painted black as sin and with lanterns in their prows that burned in daylight. The next day, the rumor reached Slynt in his barracks that there were ships wearing green and white, mermen, not wolves, standing off the Sisters and taking on water at Sisterton. On the third day, a Lyseni master mariner with a Dothraki scar showed Ned Stark a ledger that told him, in a cramped hand, that 10,000 bushels of grain that had sailed from Old Town to King's Landing had been bought outside Cracklaw by men who swore fealty to a stag. "Paper lies," Littlefinger said, when Ned pushed the ledger across to him. He was a neat man, always neat, with little fingers that never trembled when they played with coins. "I could fill 100 ledgers with coin that never existed and ships that never sailed. It is a pretty sport in the Stepstones. You are hand to a dying king, God save him, and you wish to play harbor chief? Better to bribe Janos Slynt, my lord. He is cheaper than a fleet." "Then hire him yourself," Ned said, "and hire him to keep the peace. He knows he has my eye upon him. If he takes a lion's gold, he will choke on it." Littlefinger smiled as if Ned had told him that Winterfell was a comfortable chair. "As you say, there are other matters that might command your time. The City Watch whispers that the alchemists have sent word that they can make wildfire quick with the heat. A dear art when bread grows dear." Ned said nothing to that. He left the master of coin to his neatness and his insinuations and went down to the yard where men drilled in the sun. The smell of leather and hot iron washed him clean of the council chamber. He found Desmond and Harwin at the butts with a dozen archers and watched their arrows rise and fall, rise and fall. He felt the rhythm of it in him, like waves hitting a hull's flank. The blockade was a bowstring drawn. Soon it would be loosed, soon or not at all. Stannis must be quick. Stannis was quick. The first ships slid into the gullet under half sails, painted black and fanged with oars. Dragonstone's galleys bit the water, turning it to lace where their strokes met the chop. Salladhor Saan came with 3 Lyseni Dramans that shone like beetles and with 2 lean raiders out of Myr who had never in their lives answered to any law but a purse. And yet they came because Stannis had bribed them with law itself, wrapped in coin. Behind them one by one came White Harbor's big-bellied cogs and light galleys, their rails high and their decks crowded with mariners. The Manderley captains had no love for war, but they hated famine, and they wore the stark rag on their manes like a green winter. Davos stood upon the plank beak of Black Betha and watched it unfold with a smuggler's appraisal. The gullet narrows in the place like a man's throat, he thought, and we put a cork in it now. Driftmark lay to larboard, low and green and ringed with white, the Valerian banners making a pretty garden out of the shore. To starboard, crack claw points crooked fingers dug into the tide. Dragonstone's basalt fangs watched from abaft, and the bay beyond blued and went away into haze. Above, the gulls argued incessantly over the rights of anything that floated. Betha loved a light chop. She teased the water like a cat. "Those Manderley tubs will wallow if we get any swell," Allard Seaworth said cheerfully from the tiller. "Look at that one. She drinks more than Wyman himself." "Hush," Davos said, but he smiled. A Manderley cog named Fat Merman did indeed stamp the waves as if offended by them. Her captain had hung a carved merman over her stern that made the Lyseni laugh and point. Davos watched her lift, settle, and lift again, dogged as a mule. They set their line, ships spaced like beads upon a string, and set the rules. Ships outbound were to be left alone unless they carried iron for war. Ships inbound were to be stopped and examined. Captains who had papers that bore hard seals and hands would be treated gently. Men who swore by their mother's teeth would be made to swear upon their hands instead. The first 3 days were a parade of whining. "I have girls who need bread," cried a man with a red sash from Bravos, in the common tongue bent by consonants like nails. "And I have men who need wives, and they do not have them," Wylis Manderley answered from the deck of a galley named Wolf's Den, in a voice that carried. "Go to Duskendale and trade your conscience for coin there." "But Duskendale does not pay," the Bravosi cried. "That is not my sorrow," Wylis said and flicked his hand. A Dragonstone oarsman shoved the Bravosi's hull with a pole and sent him swinging in a great slow arc that made his crew curse and run. By the 5th day, the parade had grown a set of teeth. A Lannister galley came up the gullet under false colors, changed too late, and Wylis drove Wolf's Den across her bows so hard that the Lannister's ram kissed the Manderley's iron with a screech. Grapnels flew, men shouted, a trumpet blared. Davos brought Betha Starwood to guard the gap, and Salladhor Saan drifted in like a painted spider and dropped men with hooks and wicked knives onto the Lannister deck. The fight lasted as long as a prayer said badly. When it was done, the painted spider stood with one boot on the Lannister captain's chest and called for wine. "Bread," Wylis corrected, grinning through torn lip. "We are men of bread today. There will be wine later, when lions learn manners." "Bread it shall be," Salladhor said grandly, and tossed the Lannister captain's plumed hat into the sea. Ravens flew and flew. In King's Landing, bakers found their flour dearer this week than last, and their doors banged harder upon their hinges. In the market, a woman threw a half-stale loaf at a gold cloak and split his lip. He struck her with his baton and split her skull. For men died over a sack of oats that had been watered with sand. The Alchemists Guild sent a pretty missive to the small council that said they could produce wildfire in greater quantity than their inventories suggested, if the crown's coin were to be, in their phrase, enthusiastic. "Madness," Ned said when Pycelle finished droning. "We will not cook our own city." Pycelle stroked his whiskers and made a sound like a grateful hog. Yet, if his grace were to wish, if the prince were to wish, one hears that Lord Stannis has many ships. Lord Stannis has a brother, Ned said. He was weary beyond sleep. That fact will be known when he lands to claim his right. The prince will then wish differently. The boy is king, Cersei said. She had entered like a cut of bright meat, flanked by 2 tall Lannister guards in red cloaks who stared at nothing they could not kill. Say it, Stark. All your laws and letters are smoke. The boy sits the chair and men kneel. That is how it is. Not for long, Ned said, and saw the flash of teeth that she hid from other men. You will not use wildfire in this city, your grace. It is a king's right, she said coolly. Your own north has a famous habit of lighting fires when it means to be remembered. The first men burnt the forest to plant their towers. If we must burn a little in King's Landing to unbar the harbor, then you will have the ashes you deserve. His control slipped, the words cut. You have played with children's cloth and called it silk, but law is the cloth men die for. It is not your toy, to be stained and mended for your amusement. Silence rolled across the council table like ink. Littlefinger's fingers tapped once and stopped. Varys's eyes had gone very flat. Pycelle wheezed. Cersei smiled the way snakes do. Your daughter has a pretty dress, she said. It would be a pity to spoil it in some dockside scuffle. If your men continue to make themselves foolish, I would very much like Sansa to sing at my son's coronation. Ned thought of steel cold as an answer. My men will continue doing their duty to the king and the city, he said, and when he left the council he shook so hard he wondered that his knees held him. That night, Varys came to him in plain brown and spoke softly of bribes as if they were prayer. Ned listened and declined, and Varys sighed and shrugged his round shoulders and said, Then you must do it with bread alone. Ned said he would, and he began. He ordered the crown's granaries thrown open and rationed, at price and measure set by the hand. He set men with wolf badges to the scales and numbers and saw that every bag bore the sigil of the hand stamped in hot wax. He made the butchers show their knives in public. He forbade the bakers to water flour beyond a pinch. He took a short loan from the Iron Bank of Bravos in the name of the king's grain. He sent Allen and Harwin with coin to the poorer wards and paid to have porridge cauldrons set up in the squares. Bread is law, he told Fat Tom, the words strange in his mouth and yet right as snow on pine boughs. Bread lets law speak without shouting. And if the coin runs out? Fat Tom asked. Then men will still know who spoke for them while it lasted, Ned said. That counts. The city noticed. It noticed that men with wolves on their badges stood by the scales and made lions keep their hands to themselves. It noticed that food came, thinner and dearer but present. It noticed that a few men in ragged cloaks with antlers stitched upon their sleeves began to whisper, in alehouses and cellars, about Stannis and law and a new word, right, that rolled in the mouth like a stone when one had no teeth. The city noticed everything at once, because cities do, and then it made stories of what it had noticed, and those stories multiplied, and by the 7th day of the blockade, for different songs about wolves stealing bread from lions were being sung in the flea-bottom alleys, with different names for the wolves and different names for the bread. In the 8th night, a galley out of Lannisport, flying the crowned stag with a lion sewn over it, tried to run the line in the dark. Davos had been playing Syvas with a Bravosi who cheated politely and well, and he looked up at the call and tasted salt. Black Betha slid her oars into the water with the precision of a butcher's fingers. To starboard, a Manderley galley with the name Old Fish stirred like a bored cat. Betha took the lead, her prow cutting the dark. The Lannisport galley had a stove lit, damned fool, so she wore a lantern's ghost even when she meant to be shadow. Davos closed and saw the shape of her, the line of her freeboard, the men at the ready with poles and hooks. He did not love fighting on the water. He had made a living avoiding it for too many years. But the thing was in him now, as if men were only fish who told themselves tales. Ram her amidships, Allard said. No, Davos said. Twist her. And they did. Betha's prow kissed the Lannisport galley's flank just abaft the midline. A tender kiss with iron teeth. The Lannister men lurched. The oars on their port side lifted at the wrong moment. Betha's oars on starboard beat a hard rhythm, weight and counterweight, and Davos felt the satisfying shudder as the enemy's oars snapped like sticks. They dropped grapnels and pulled, and when the boats kissed, the men kissed too, with knives and hooks and curses. Wylus towed the prize to Driftmark when it had surrendered, and the Valerians buckled their smiles and took it into their pretty harbor. Wylus came aboard Betha later with a cracked helmet under his arm and laughter hanging from his beard. "Lions swim poorly," he said, "but they drown beautifully." Davos laughed with him, and later went to stand at the bow alone. The wind had shifted and smelt of green things growing inland. He thought of his boys, of Dale already talking like a lordling, of Devon quiet and careful, of little Stannis with his sticky fingers and serious eyes, of Mathos with the way he always made a thing with his hands before he believed he knew it. He thought of the city, he thought of the law. He liked the way law felt in the mouth like a well-made word. In King's Landing, the Queen called a meeting of the small council in the Tower of the Hand. Her jest, perhaps, and told them in cool words that this blockade would end. Littlefinger suggested a sudden largesse or two to the Goldcloaks and perhaps to certain hungry inns in the Mudgate quarter, to teach the wolves humility. Pycelle spoke again of alchemists and Wildfire and his youth when he had been less old than he was. Varys suggested that perhaps a certain letter to certain lords in the Reach would find an echo, if Marjorie was named with a rose and a title. Ned listened and said, "No," and said it again, and then he stood, not as a lord stands but as a soldier does, moving from the joints upward. "Lord Stannis is law," he said. "I have sent to him because Robert commanded me. We will hold this city in bread and peace until he comes to take it with honor. If any of you send to Highgarden for ships to burn this blockade, understand me, you will answer to a king who will remember." Cersei's mouth thinned. "You will not leave this city alive," she said. It was as if she had told him the tower had stairs. "Perhaps," he said. "I have been dying since the day my father burned. The speed of it interests me little now. But my girls will live, and so will half of King's Landing that would have died in a sally against Stannis' galleys. Feed your pride on Wildfire if you must. The rest of us will eat grain." He found Sansa and Arya that evening and told them that if men in red cloaks came to fetch them, they were to go meekly with Harwin. He told Sansa there would be songs again, but for now it was time to be brave. He told Arya that Syrio would stay with her a while longer and that she should listen to what the water taught. He kissed their brows and stood a long time in the door while they cried into each other's hair, and then he shut it gently and went away. The next morning, a half-dozen Goldcloaks in Janos Slint's confidence came to the grain yard in the Dun Fort with a writ from somewhere and left with bruises and without their writ. The day after, a lion man named Horus showed himself at the mud gate with a purse heavy enough to dent skulls, and a woman with hands like rope burned 3 of his fingers with a cook's iron and went on ladling porridge. In the evening, Littlefinger came to Ned with a piece of advice disguised as gossip. "They say men with antlers drink free at the Inn of the Green Apple now," he said, smiling. Ned did not ask him who paid for the ale. He did, however, send a sealed letter to the September of Baelor with a small purse and a larger request. The High Septon, puffed and priestly and fonder of honey than bees, blinked slow when he read it, and then he said, "Bread and righteousness? That is a dear wine to serve the poor. It can sour." Ned told him that wine soured less quickly if mixed with water, and to that the Septon laughed and promised sermons about law and kings and the sin of gluttony. "The Queen will like the last," he said, but his eyes showed he liked the first better. By the 15th day, men sang a coarse song about a fat merman feeding wolves with one hand while stealing from lions with the other. By the 16th, the song had 3 tunes, and by the 17th, a 4th tune that only the Ibanese could carry without coughing. On the 18th day, Renly Baratheon fled the city with Ser Loras Tyrell and a dozen picked men. The sound of their horses' shod hooves in the yard of the Hand's Tower like hail on slate. Ned watched them go from above with Desmond, thinking of warm-cooked meat and soft beds. Renly had asked Ned Stark to move quickly with him, to pluck a king out of the Godswood while the usurpers slept. Ned had said no. Loras had looked at him as if Ned had said that winter did not come. So they went, and the city's music changed in a minor way, and the queen drank wine upon her balcony as if nothing had happened at all. On the 19th day, Tywin Lannister at the headwaters of the Blackwater finally lifted his cup from the messenger's letters, smiled thinly, and sent Adam Marbrand riding with 500 horse to burn what grain still came by river. On the 20th, the blockade tightened. Davos could smell it. Men who had started uncertain now lowered their eyes when told to furl their sails and be counted. Men who had tested the line and found it iron did not test it twice. Men who had thought of breaking for shore alone found that a smuggler's cunning was of less use when a 100 oars beat the same drum. Then came a fleet that did not test so delicately. It showed itself before noon on a windy day, bright like beetles and ripe as figs, and carried in it many flags that smelt of saffron and sweet rot. Myrish sail sails, 40 and 5, with 4 Lannister galleys stitched into the swarm like teeth. They came not in a neat line but in 2 ragged, quick snakes, faster than Manderley cogs, reckless as hungers. Davos looked at the line and saw where it would break. Left, he told Allard, and the tiller came over. Betha swung starboard to take the leading snake in the cheek. Wylis kicked Wolf's Den to larboard as if a mule needed reminding. Salladhor Saan, drunk on wind and himself, slid between them with a laugh that carried across water like a gull's mockery. The first collision was not wood. It was air and intention. The line flexed, shook, held. Then wood. A Myrish raider struck Old Fish a long glancing blow that splintered both their rails. The raider's captain tried to leap across with a curved sword in his teeth and fell between hulls, and the water took him down like a mother that had changed her mind. Black Betha drove her ram into the side of a Lannister galley and tore loose with a sound like a butcher's hook coming free of gristle. Men fell everywhere as if knocked from a table. Arrows made their soft hurried sound. Flames took, quick where oil had been spilled, slower where fresh water had slopped onto tar. Somewhere, a barrel of something that should not have been aboard a ship, wildfire from an incautious alchemist, or a barrel of old pitch gone peculiar, lit with a clap that sent men to their knees. A man screamed in Tyroshi and then in no tongue at all. Wylis clout a Myrish captain across his plumes and roared, his teeth all red with some man's blood or his own. Davos found himself with a knife in his hand and a line of sweat under his hair and no memory of how either had come there. "Turn them," he heard himself call. "Turn their oars." And Betha did, with Allard and as many men as could spare their hands beating a rhythm that made their bones feel like drums. The mere men to port tried to answer and could not. Men fall out of rhythm easily when men die beside them. Betha's oars punched, withdrew, punched again, and Davos saw the quick, delicate mathematics of it. Oars in, oars out, weight, counterweight, and suddenly a ship that had been sure of her own mind could not remember which way the water lay, and she turned, slow and lingering and full of mistaken dignity, like a lord who has misheard his own name. The next ship in line ran along her flank, staved in 3 ribs, and had to choose between honor and sinking. She chose to sink. Wylis laughed and threw his broken helmet at a man boarding him, and the helmet struck that man in the temple and turned him like a bell. Salladhor had climbed some improbable height, one of his own masts, it seemed, and shouted to his men to put hooks at the right moments, and somehow they did, and somehow 3 Myrish raiders clung to his dromon like remeras and were suddenly, equally somehow, empty of Myrish. The Lannister galleys were not fools, but they were weighed down with expectation, the kind of weight that makes captains miss a small thing. The set of a current, the half-breath that is a Manderley sailor's smile before he slips a knife between rope and rail. When it was over, the sun had a hard ring around it and the air tasted of pennies. 2 of White Harbor's cogs went down, and men in green and white and plain brown were plucked from the chop by Dragonstone hands and Lyseni, because men on the water belonged to the water first, and to their banners second. For Lannister galleys were taken, 2 burnt, and 1 broke herself against Driftmark in an attempt to flee. 6 Myrish raiders bobbed like killed fish. Salladhor Saan drank wine from a captured captain's helm and poured a libation onto the deckboards for the men who had gone to the bottom. Wylis stood with his hands on his hips and laughed like a boy. Davos found he was cold. He looked down and saw that the sweat had dried on him and left salt like frost. Men came to him with questions, and he answered them in a voice he recognized from younger days, quick and quiet. He found the ledger in his mind that tallied losses and gains and the space between them. He thought briefly of Stannis and of Law and of any god who might be watching. Then he went to help cut a man free whose leg had been trapped between two timbers. The man screamed once and fainted when Davos and another put their weight to it, and the leg came away with less blood than there should have been. "Bread," Wylis said later, clapping Davos on the shoulder as if they had haggled over onions. "For all that mess, we bought the city another 7 days of bread." "More," Davos said. "Men carry fear faster than grain. They will talk in the next port and the next. The blockade holds when stories hold." "And who pays for those?" Wylis asked, earnest as a priest. "Everyone," Davos said. "That is why they last." In King's Landing, the alchemists' wildfire sat in green jars and sang their quiet songs to no one. The gold cloaks prowled the grain yards with late-born discipline and older appetites. The queen drank, showed her teeth to men who might notice, and had a slow-burning lamp moved closer to the map of the bay until Long Waters the harbormaster bowed and begged her to put the flame away. Ned met with Janos Slint on the ramparts of the mud gate after dark, where the river below looked like the skin of a black adder and the lanterns winked like its scales. "You will keep your men sober," he told Slint. His breath made ghosts in the cool. "You will keep them honest. If I hear of a single grain sack going missing between gate and granary, I will hang men till I find the one who took it." Slint's face was a closed purse. "My men are loyal men," he said. "They love the king. They will love the law and their lives more," Ned said. "You have a son as I have daughters. Do not make me a liar in my promises to them." Slint shifted his weight. "There is much talk among the men," he said at last. "This business in the bay. The men say it cannot last, that there will be fighting sooner or later." "There may be," Ned said. "If there is, keep your men from it. The bay is not yours. The streets are. If you hold them, this city will go to sleep and wake up with a king who did not poison it. And if a man says the boy is king now, then do not let him shout it in your men's ears," Ned said. "You have an ear for that kind of thing, do you not? Hear it before they do." Slint laughed, a small ugly sound. "Aye," he said. "Ido." By the 23rd day, the porridge kettles had become an institution, and a priest told Ned that men were beginning to come early, to listen to sermons because there is nothing else to do when one is hungry. By the 25th, the queen tried to move against the kettles by sending men with cloaks to overturn them at 3 squares, and Alan cracked a skull at one and Harwin cracked an arm at another, and at the 3rd the small folk themselves cracked the ground under the men with cloaks. The porridge spilled and steamed, and no one wanted to wade in it to fight. By the 30th day, Stannis Baratheon came ashore at the king's gate under a flag of parley, and with him Melisandre, and the rumor went before them like foam on a breaker. Ned met him on the steps beneath the wall, with the river behind and the city before, with a small escort and Harwin's eyes on everything. Stannis's face had been carved out of intent. "You choose a hard road," Stannis said by way of greeting. "You always did. Law is harder," Ned said. He did not look at the red woman longer than a blink. "How much longer can you hold the gullet?" "Until it grows gills," Stannis said, and after a small moment, he appeared to realize he had made a jest. His mouth pulled against it. "Long enough. Manderly's men are stubborn and mine are accustomed to doing as they are told. Salador has discovered conscience where he always kept it. In a chest." "You have made enemies in the city," Ned said simply. "The queen looks to wildfire, Littlefinger to gold, Varys to air." "Air," Stannis said, and glanced sideways at the woman beside him, as if surprised to find her still there. "You cannot keep a city upon the edge of a knife, Stark. It will either fall on one side or the other." "It has not fallen yet," Ned said. "If it falls toward you, I will have done right. If it falls toward the queen, then I will have done what I could. I will not start a slaughter in the throne room." "You would lose that, besides," Stannis said. "You do not pay men first and then trust them to be brave. You trust them first and then pay them, and they do as you wished all along, because that was what they were for." "You have read different books than I have," Ned said, and that made Stannis grunt. "We will give her 7 more days of bread," Stannis said, as if granting a loan. After that, every ship we stop will be stripped of its grain, and the grain burned before her eyes on a raft. And we will watch her learn what hunger does to pride. Do not, Ned said. The city is not the queen. It has some of her appetites, but none of her titles. Do not teach the small folk to hate you when you mean to rule them. Melisandre's eyes were on Ned. They were the color of dark wine held to a fire. King's Landing is not a queen, she said, and her accent made the words feel older than they were. Nor a king, nor a law. It is a wick. One day fire will run down it. Best to choose the match. Ned thought of ice and said nothing. He took Stannis into the gatehouse, and they spoke long and low, of banners and fastnesses and men who might look like allies until called upon. Stannis said that when he raised his claim there would be no room for ambiguity. Ned said that ambiguity was a room men often slept in when they lacked walls. When Stannis left, he took two of Ned's words with him, as if they were reins: bread and law. The Red Woman's gaze brushed Ned as she passed. He felt it the way a man feels the attention of a strange wolf in the dark. The city, that wick, grew drier. Tywin had found that he could not easily burn what grain hid along the river without also burning the towns along with it. Men who had cheered lions for sport did not cheer them when their homes smoked. He drew his men back like the tide. In the Reach, Lord Mace hesitated with a peacock's gravity, and Paxter Redwine's captains wrote long letters about prevailing winds and trade commitments. In the Iron Islands, a king in all but name stared at the waves and tasted salt on his lips. Cersei began to send men to watch the porridge kettles and count bowls, and those men came back with numbers she did not like. She sent for Janos Slynt and made him drink with her and told him stories about the mercy of kings. Then she sent for Pycelle and made him talk until he slept. Then she sent for her brother and made him smile and promise her anything. When she sent for Littlefinger, he came like a man to a game, and when she told him what she wanted, he laughed, soft and slow. Rats can be starved from a granary, he said, but they can also be lulled to sleep by full bellies. Your grace can do either. You have chosen the first. If you wish to keep the porridge kettles, you must own them. The hand has put his badge upon them. Put yours. Cersei did as he advised. The next morning, 3 fresh kettles appeared, with Lannister men to watch the ladles and count the bowls. Men ate from them because they were hungry, and sang a new song that had gold in it, and the wolves found that where they fed, lions fed too. Ned stood and watched the line of bowls and bent heads, and his face was the snow that lies on a cairn, old and necessary. Do we stop this? Harwin asked, grim. No, Ned said, but we set a man at every ladle, and we count bowls that carry my seal and bowls that carry hers, and we make a list of names. One day this will matter. When? Harwin asked. When men remember. The 27th day, a cutter slid beneath the line by night, black as a shark and silent as one, with 4 oars per side and a man in her stern who never looked back. Davos did not catch her in time. He saw where she had been only when she was gone. Later he learned that she had tied up at the King's Landing fish market and slipped 4 men ashore near the mud gate, and those men were seen later in the back of a cart with the scent of copper about them. He did not know whose coin had bought it. He did not like that. On the 30th day, the weather changed. The wind came round from the northeast and the sea built, handful by handful, into a tidy, self-satisfied chop. White Harbor's broad-bellied cogs did not like it, but they bore it. Dragonstone's galleys loved it more than they should have. In the city, the wind stripped sheets off lines and sent them tumbling into the river, where men dived like birds after them. On the 32nd day, the queen made her misstep. At dawn, a royal barge left the king's gate with 20 oars and a small banner and 3 covered wagons piled high with sacks. Men muttered as it went. Men always muttered. The barge took the channel toward Driftmark and pretended to look for a certain captain, and pretended to send a messenger ashore in a skiff, and in that little muddle she tried to slide past the men Ned had placed at the mouth with a flotilla of copied seals and a half of the crown's weight in grain. It might have worked had men been merely pieces to be moved. But men were also men. A boy on a Manderley galley with a nose for sweet things. He would later swear he had always known brown sugar from white by smell alone. raised his head and blinked and caught a whiff of something that did not belong and sang out. Wylus swung Wolf's den about with a zeal that made his timbers complain, and Davos came across with Betha like a courtesan changing sides in a quarrel. The barge's captain raised his hands and his voice and declared himself royal in a voice too shrill. Davos looked at the seals, felt their edges with his thumb, and found the insinuation of a file there. Wylus asked that the sacks be cut open. Sugar spilled like sand. A dozen sacks deeper they found the grain. Under those coin. Bread, Wylus said. Law, Davos said. They took the grain and the coin and let the barge keep the sugar, which made the Lyseni roar with laughter and the barge captain turn quite a pretty color. The next day, all 3 squares found that their porridge had honey in it. Men ate and licked their lips and let Law have their gratitude in fleeting little sips. In the Red Keep, Cersei broke a cup against the hearth and looked at the blood like a script she could not read. 2 days later, Stannis made his move, because 2 days is the time required for a man like him to move from resolve to act. He brought 3 galleys, 2 his, 1 that belonged to Salador and was on loan to the cause of virtue, under the city walls and had casks rolled out upon the decks. He had Ned's lists in his hand and a voice that carried. They broke the casks and showed what was inside to all eyes. Grain, grain, grain. They lit no torches. They talked of price and of the crown's debts, and of the fact that the crown had tried to smuggle grain out while men went hungry. It was the smallest of spectacles, and yet it pulled something in the city sideways. It was not quite rebellion. It was a change in posture. Men do not leap to their feet when their backs have ached for too long. They shift in their chairs. But chairs can tip. The queen sent for Janos Slint. The queen sent for Pycelle. The queen sent for the High Septon, who spoke of honey and justice. The queen sent for Littlefinger and for the men who held the keys to the treasury. She sent for Joffrey, and Joffrey came, sullen and dull-eyed, and played with his dagger while his mother spoke. "Will the wolves starve us?" he asked, when the noise ran down. "I will hang them all. I will feed them their own guts." "Say it more sweetly, sweetling," Cersei said, and patted his cheek. The queen named Tyrion Lannister her envoy to the Reach that night, because she had no one else she could trust who had coin and a tongue and a name that Hightower would not spit upon. Tyrion went because he was tired of the smell of brood in the Red Keep. He went with a company of sellswords and a good supply of other men's gold. He did not say farewell to the hand. The city exhaled when he left. By the 40th day, the blockade was a fact of life. The city had adopted it, as cats adopt men who feed them, with suspicion and entitlement both. The men from Old Town, watching the price of candles, wrote new sums into their ledgers and tried to take them home. Duskendale grew richer. Rosby grew cunning. The Myrish raiders who had thought to make sport of wolves turned to softer prey along the fingers, and the men of those fingers proved less soft than they looked, and thus a different song was written. Then, at last, the thing that had been waiting announced itself, because history dislikes prologue longer than the play. Stannis raised his banner not as a courtesy but as a claim. He did it in a storm with the waves piling and the sky iron, because that is when Stannis does things. He sent letters with seals the equal of any in the realm, invoking names that kings and maesters counted holy. He said that the boy upon the throne wore a crown and name not his. He said the law said one thing and men had pretended it said another. He said the north stood with him and the sea had been put in order. He did not mention his red priestess. He did not mention his brother. He did not mention the part of himself that had always expected to be overlooked. Ned read the letter in his solar with the window open to a wedge of sky. He closed it and called for ink and wrote 2 things in reply: that he would hold the city at peace until Stannis came, and that the children in it would not pay for their mother's sins. He sealed the letter with the direwolf and sent it with a man he trusted and a coin that would see him through bands of men whose trust was more easily bought. "Is this wise?" Varys asked later, when Ned stood alone and the evening made long shadows of the chair legs. "I do not know if it is wise," Ned said, "but it is right." Varys sighed and played with the fringe on his sleeve. "The queen will not kneel," he said. "Women who have built their lives out of untruth cannot do it. She will only find a different untruth to stand upon." "Then take it out from under her," Ned said, and went to his daughters. He found Arya asleep on Sirio's floor with a wooden sword in her hand and a wet footprint on her brow. He found Sansa awake, staring at nothing as if it would shortly become a Myrish princess. He sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand, and when she would have begun to speak, he squeezed gently and shook his head. "We will go home," he said. "If the gods are good, we will go home." Outside, in the dark, a song rose about bread and wolves and a fat lord with a river for a throne. Men sang because men do. On the bay the lanterns moved in little purposeful constellations, and far out, a red star that was not a star watched the city as if it knew it and loved it and despised it in equal parts. Wylus Manderly lay on his back on the deck of Wolf's Den and counted the beats between lightning and the thunder that followed it. Once, when he was a boy, he had done the same in a field near White Harbor and found that fear was only anticipation for a thing that, when it came, was less interesting than the waiting. He smiled to think that law was like that. Work first, then weather. Davos, asleep in his narrow cabin, dreamed of onions and kings and a coin that rolled and would not fall until he put his foot on it. Stannis, awake, watched the storm and did not blink. In the Red Keep, Cersei dreamt of fire running down a wick, and when she woke she lit a candle, then another, until the room was full of little lights and her shadow fled and returned and fled again. She stood, breathed, and smiled into the candle's heat like a cat loving the kitchen hearth. On the 40th day, the city did not fall. On the 41st, it did not fall. On the 42nd, the High Septon preached upon bread and law and honey, and a woman with a cut on her cheek licked her ladle and thought, "If this is kingship, I can bear it." On the 43rd, a boy with a knife and a foot too fast nearly killed Alan, and Alan nearly killed him, and when he did not, the boy wept so hard his nose bled. On the 44th, Littlefinger paid for 5 loaves to be delivered to a house where no one lived, that he might later tell a story about charity. On the 45th, Janos Slint said a prayer that had no God in it and slept better afterward. On the 50th day, the Reach moved. Men who had not moved for 49 days shifted in their chairs. Paxter Redwine's captains wrote letters with an air of apology and began to count their anchors. Lord Mace stood up and sat down and stood again and finally decided that time moves even for men who dislike it. He sent messages and the messages became ships. But time does more than move. It accrues. On the 54th day, the first Redwine hulls raised the horizon like geese, and by then men in King's Landing had grown used to porridge and law. By then, men in the Gullet had learned each other's names and the way each other moved. By then, this new thing had sunk in beyond argument. The Redwine fleet came sweet and full as summer wine, and the smell of them was grapes and spice. Davos smelled it and thought of kings growing soft. Wylus smelled it and thought of the Reach and the years before his house had learned new gods. Stannis smelled it and thought numbers. Salador San smelled it and thought of coin, and of which side would pay him after, and which would pay him now. They did not take the blockade with a rush. Paxter Redwine was not a fool and did not hire fools. They sat and looked and counted. They sent a galley here and there to taste the line, and the line tasted back. Men shouted across water with manners as polished as any in a court, and then their arrows spoke for them. The Reach did not love to get wet. The North had been wet for 54 days. Ned Stark stood on the wall and watched the far play of candles on the water. The city muttered around him as always, a beast content when fed that went mean when not. He thought of Robert, who had loved men the way a hungry man loves roast, and of the boy in the red cloak with a crown that did not fit his brow, and of Stannis with his iron face, and of Cersei with her little lights. He wondered if he could bring them by words to the same table and make them eat bread. He had not much hope of that, but then he had hopes for other things. When the first horns blew from the Redwine galleys, the sound did not feel like war. It felt like harvest. Men turned to their tasks as if for reaping. Davos took Black Betha out into the wind's teeth and felt her love him for it. Wylus put a fresh helm on his shaggy head and grinned a bloody grin he had prepared days ago. Stannis signaled with flags that meant something even in failing light. The Merman's Court's bell reached as far as it could. In the end, there was no great battle that left poets satisfied and men bereft. There was work. There were hours stained with salt and the little math of oars and angle and tide. There were ships that drifted when they meant to turn. There were men who died stupid and men who died clever and men who did not die but took a cut that would weather with them. There were red wine captains who sighed and backed water and said the wind misliked them. And there were Northmen who spat and grinned into it and beat the river with their hands. The blockade bent and did not break. King's Landing ate porridge and songs and crows, which is to say, it did what cities do. After, when the Reach had withdrawn to count men and make speeches, and Stannis had set his line more cunningly with rocks and ropes that were not rocks or ropes, and Wylis had finally laughed himself to sleep, Ned wrote one more letter, to one more man who might be king, and it said a thing simple enough to fit in a child's hand. Come. When at last he did, with banners that had never learned to dance and men who had, the city met him not with cheers or with curses but with a long, low breath that might have been relief. It had been fed. It had not burned. Could afford a little law for a little while. Cersei Lannister stood on a balcony and watched the banners come and the men who bore them, and beside her, a boy who called himself king chewed the inside of his cheek until he bled. Below them, wolves and mermen and stags moved upon water and stone. Behind them, the candles guttered in a draught no servant could stop. Above them, a red star blinked. Between, everything that men do to keep from falling seemed both wise and ridiculous. And far to the north, in a place where mist lies on the water and bells sing thick, Lord Wyman Manderley ate a piece of barley bread as if it were a meat. He chewed it thoughtfully, savoring the bland thrift of it, and swallowed. "By his hand," he said to no one and smiled and reached for another slice.